Hello, Neil here. Thanks for listening to On the Green Fence. In this final episode of our forest series, we're doing a bit of time travel and also going a bit meta by looking at how our relationship with forests and the meaning of forests has changed over the past 2 millennia. And I've handpicked 3 defining periods for this that illustrate this change rather strikingly. But of course, I'll also be looking ahead to what lessons we can draw from this, for preserving our forests in future. And luckily here where I'm based in the Rhineland, just south of Bonn, it's a very historic area that was and still is dominated by the forest. And most of what I need for this episode is pretty much within a day's walking distance, which is why I've got my hiking shoes on today. And I'm very happy to say that I won't be doing this alone. I've got scientific backup for this outing today. Dr. Agata Konczal from Bonn, who's an environmental anthropologist with the Forest and Nature Conservation Policy Group. Agata, I really appreciate you joining me for this today.
Thank you for having me here.
Agata, before we start our time travel, can you perhaps just please, in a nutshell, explain what exactly does an environmental anthropologist do?
That's actually quite difficult questions. We do a lot of things, but I'm mostly interested in the relationship between people and forests. You could say between people and nature. So I'm looking how people understand, how people use, how people value nature today, in the past, and also maybe in the future. So basically we explore what is the relationship between people and the forest in different countries, in different places, different cultures, you could say, in different societies.
And you have a specific theory regarding forests and humans, right? I believe it's called the transition theory?
That's actually theory we explore in one of our papers. We discussed there that maybe we actually hypothesize that there can be a link between the forest landscape, how this forest landscape look like, and our spiritual connection to this forest landscape. So actually how the forest evolved can also help us to understand how our spiritual connection to forest changed over centuries, over years, and also in different countries, different cultures.
Okay, wow. So we've got plenty to talk about today. Time for us to get started. And we'll be kicking off in Rheinbrohl, about 20 miles south of Bonn. It's the starting point of a UNESCO World Heritage Site of truly epic length that will transport us back to the approximately 2nd century when the Roman Empire was at its height in Europe, and it could have expanded even more if it hadn't been for some of those indomitable Germanic tribes hiding out in the forest.
People should know when they're conquered.
Chances are that you've seen the film Gladiator, which opens with a rather savage forest battle between Roman forces led by Russell Crowe, or Maximus, as he's called, and hairy Germanic barbarians led by a rather large unnamed man resembling a bear. Well, right now Agata and I are standing in a forest just east of Rheinbrohl, and we've come here because this is pretty much the starting point of the world's 2nd largest border fortification, the so-called limes, which the Romans built after giving up on conquering all of Germania. And we're standing precisely where this fortification used to be, and you can still see remnants of this old wall that ran over 550 kilometers across southwestern Germany from the Rhine all the way down to the Danube. Quite an accomplishment, even by Roman standards. So it's really not surprising that it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's quite an atmospheric site here in the forest. All we need is a bit of mist and a few barbarians coming through the trees with spears, and we'd really have the Gladiator film setting here. Agata, talking of, this period in history, why is this Roman Germanic period so interesting when it comes to forests?
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting for us to think about, because you need to remember that forest was surrounding people at the time. People live in the forest, people lived from the forest, and basically nature was the power surrounding them. So basically forest and nature was the god. So for Germanic tribes, or for people living 2,000, 3,000 years ago here, forest was the explanation of the word. Forest was the word for them. And then you have this Romans coming from today's Italy, and their landscape was really different. They were already advancing with the agriculture. They have these open fields. They don't know the forest as the forest was here. So it was really surprising for them to come and be confronted with this green wall. But from people living here, that was the normal landscape. So that time, forest was everything people could understand, everything what people could see. So it was all, you could say it was a gate to understand the world and life. So as I said, forest nature, it was a god that time. So of course their relationship with forest was different, was shaped by this landscape, was shaped by this environment they lived in, they were surrounded by.
I mean, the Germanic sort of forest is also quite mythical, isn't it? I mean, they had holy trees, groves played a very important role, didn't it? According to the Roman historian Tacitus, all the cult practices took place in groves. So for them, the forest was like a safe haven as well, wasn't it? But for the Romans, maybe, I mean, were they sort of like more scared of the forest? Because that's where those barbarians were hiding out, right?
Yes, definitely, but I would not say that forest was safe haven for Germanic tribes that time, because, you could say that nature was giving, but nature was also taking. You didn't know what nature could do with you, one could say. So nature was mystery. There was something you could not understand, something you could not tame, one could say, right? So it was something beyond your control. But from the Romans coming here, as you also said, the landscape was completely different. They did not know this, so that's why they were so scared. They really don't understand why these people are coming from the forest wearing these animal skins. What is happening? It was an unknown environment for them. So when they started settling here, that actually is interesting. They started changing the landscape. Not only use it, not only cutting trees to build the limes or ships or buildings, but they also started bringing the trees they know from their country, from their home area. So, for example, we still have trees that were that time brought by Romans.
So the trees were invasive as well. It wasn't just the Romans.
Well, I could say that Romans were invasive with their trees because, we want to live in the environment we know. That's why we shape it. So the image of safe home environment, one could say safe forest for Romans, that was something different that they discovered here. So they started to shaping it.
And what would you say in terms of, this period shaping our relationship with forests, the knock-on effects that this period had? How big an impact did this Roman conquest of most of Europe have in terms of our perception of the forest?
This is a very difficult question. I definitely would say that, this time change, or this invasion, one could say, changed the way we use landscape. We see the landscape. So we started pushing back forest, right? We started to tame the nature. We started investing more in agriculture. We started having more fields. Of course, later there was again a break with Dark Ages and so on. But we started understanding our relationship with the landscape differently. So forest was started to be pushed back outside of cities, outside of villages. It was something already outside the safe, home, known space. Forest started to be a little bit farther from us.
We've got some descendants of those old Germanic tribes passing us by just there in the background, some hikers. Germans, they have a reputation for loving the forest, right, and loving their trees, and they like go hiking in the forest and spending time in the forest. Is this something that rings back to those old Germanic times? Is this something that's a linear progression?
That's a difficult question again. I would be a little bit hesitant to draw this line for 2,000 years and seeking for the explanation of today's Germans' love and connection to forest in this times, Roman or Germanic times. But this is definitely something we think about. I used to think about trees not only as element of the environment, but items or elements that teach us what and how to remember. So because the landscape look like this today, we think about our history in this place or through this place differently. Forest trees, they help to shape us what is the history, what kind of history of the nation, of society we want to have and want to remember. So even though I would be a little bit skeptical with this long-term stretch between Roman times and nowadays German society. Definitely, the fact that people still remember that, still cultivate this memory or like to refer to that, tells us something about the German society, and they link to the forest. They still want to bring that memories. They want to look for elements in the environment, in the landscape that brings it back.
And what about certain types of trees? I mean, is there a connection there, to certain tree species through history that have established themselves in a certain landscape in a certain region that the Germans have gotten used to, and therefore they feel that connection to this tree? Like, I don't know, the oak tree, for instance. I mean, there's often talk of the German oak tree, right?
Yeah, that definitely is a good example. So exactly in these pagan times, we have these oak trees devoted to particular god to make sure that, he is present in these trees, and then he will guide people and he will protect people or forest or particular land. And I see this link to the oak trees. The oak trees, they become a symbol of strength, of power. So definitely this is something people like to relate to. But landscape change. When we talk about 2,000 years, we have completely different forest. We change this forest as people through our management, through our ideas and vision, through our use of forest. So now when we look around, we still have a lot of beech forest, but we have a lot of monocultures. We have pines, we have spruces. This is not what, 2,000 years ago you would find in the forest. So definitely we change the forest, and even though we still connect to it, to the forest as a part of our identity, forest is not the same. Forest changed the same as society changed.
That's interesting, because then actually, in fact, that gladiator setting that we were describing at the beginning of this chapter, they probably have to refilm that if they wanted to make it authentic, right? That is not what the German forest looked like back then. That's, in the film, it's the monoculture you can see, but not the sort of the diverse wild forest that would have been around 2,000 years ago.
Yes, definitely. That time we would have less spruces, less pines. We have more oak. We have more hornbeams. Maybe we have also lime trees. Definitely no monoculture. That came long later.
Right, we'll be getting to that chapter in a bit. Let's just move on to another defining period now when it comes to forests and identity, to the Middle Ages. And we'll be heading a bit further north to the foot of the Siebengebirge for this, to what is a rather famous monastery in these parts. This is what it may have sounded like here 800 years ago after this monastery was founded. We're standing here in the ruins of the Kloster Heisterbach, and incidentally, the old German word Heister means young beech tree. And a beech tree also plays an important part in an old legend tied to this monastery, but we'll get to that later. Today, this monastery is just a ruin, and actually you can hear the church bells there in the distance. It's also a tourist attraction at the foot of the Siebengebirge, and a great starting point to explore the forest and get some fantastic views across the Rhine Valley, if you are happy to climb a bit, that is. Agata's looking at me here with big eyes. But yeah, we came here today because Christianity played a key role in changing our relationship with the forest. And Agata, in the first chapter of this episode, you told me that nature was God for the people back then, and now Christianity, I mean, it was a game changer for Europe on so many levels, and it dominated the Middle Ages. What did this mean for our relationship with forests back then, the arrival of Christianity?
Yes, so we came from Roman times and from pagan times when, as you said, nature was a god, forest was a god. And now we are in the time when God created nature for us. And we are stewards of the nature and of the forest. It's changed completely the relationship between people and forest. So forest is still, or can be still, kind of secret place, but place where you can worship God, where you can get in touch with Him or feel His presence. But nature is not anymore your God. Your God is outside of forest, and you also, as a society, you kind of live outside of forests. You move to the monasteries, you move to villages, you move to towns. So you also kind of physically separate yourself from the forest. And now you look at the forest as something what was created for you. You can use it, you can kind of concrete it for your own needs, for your own purposes. And what is really important, and I want to really put emphasis on that, because this is the time when we kind of, in Christianity or in the Christian cultures, we really started to separate ourselves a little bit from the nature. Nature is outside. We are outside of the forest. We can go to the forest, we can use it, but we do not live within the forest anymore, mentally and physically.
That detachment from the forest that you sort of say, if I understood you correctly, Christianity also pushed that in a way, detaching us a bit from nature and putting us above nature, that we're stewards and it's there for us and that we rank higher. Is that something, I mean, compared to other regions of the globe, is this something that is unique to Europe and Christianity?
I would not say it's unique to Christianity. You can see similar attitudes or understanding of people and nature relationship also in Islam or in some of the Asian cultures. But if you take a look at the indigenous communities around the world, for example in the Amazon forest or in Siberia, they do not have this division between culture and nature. This is something what actually was brought to us by enlightenment, but development of science, by the development of knowledge. So it's not a universal division. And I think it's important for us to remember that it's kind of a construct, social construct that we kind of brought, we kind of live in, but it's not universal. Not all societies, not all cultures distinguish themselves from the nature. They see themselves as integral part of nature.
Because I mean also the aspect with Christianity, with evolution, right? It's I mean, if you go to Middle Ages, they said we're not, we're directly created by God, right? We're a godly creation, we're created in God's image. Later there was this whole, when science made advances and Darwin, the origin of the species, etc. Christianity also questioned that to a certain degree, not until quite recently in certain parts of the globe. It still questions it, whether we're descended from monkeys or not. So I guess in a way Christianity, I mean, it seems like it wasn't exactly helpful for our relationship with nature, or was it?
Yeah, I think it's a big call to judge it this way. But what I would like to maybe highlight is that our relationship with forest and nature was so strong that Christianity could not erase it completely. If you look at many customs, when you look at many traditions we perceive these days as Christians, they were actually assimilated from paganism. When you think about Christmas tree, when you think about how we understand or use particular tree species, how we celebrate or different festivals, what kind of wood products or forest products we use for it, how we perceived some festivals, even like, the 1st of May when you have Weinbaum, you can see a lot of influence. So Christianity was not strong enough really to erase all of these relationships we have with nature. It kind of changed them, but did not completely erase them.
And what about, was there a growing ethical awareness in the Middle Ages for, also in terms of sustainability? That, you said that nature was there for us to use. Was there any awareness back then that, okay, we're only going to use what we need and make sure that nature remains intact? Or was there any form of awareness in that direction?
I think this kind of awareness came a bit later. It only came, I would say, 17th, 18th century. But we should not say that it was not there in the Middle Ages at all. When you look at monasteries, exactly the places similar to the one we are in today, monks or some communities, they try to manage nature in a sustainable way because exactly of this relationship with God they have. They see it as, something God created for them, but they should not misuse it. So if you look at some monasteries, some congregations, this awareness was already there. So I think this is also something some of the religious leaders like Pope Francis try to build on today, right? When he wrote his encyclical Laudato Si, when he is also talking about our responsibility for the nature, he's also referring to that times, like, Christianity has this element. We just need to actually go a little bit deeper. We need to do our homework in understanding what Christianity actually can offer for our relationship with the nature.
And what about the aspect of ownership? Was it already starting to emerge back then, who owns the forest, that only certain people have a right to use it or to log trees or to hunt in the forest, for instance? Ownership, how important was that when it comes to the forest in the Middle Ages?
Oh, in the Middle Ages, I would say that there was a very clear division. who owns what and who can use what. So hunting or cutting the forest, it was, huge privilege. And it was reserved only for the kings, for dukes, also for the church, for the monasteries. By the simple peasants, they live outside of the forest. They could use it, mostly for the cattle, for the animals, but they could not cut it. They could not hunt there. And I think it also shows us how important was the forest, because it was something what was kept for the most privileged part of society.
I mean, the Middle Ages, there was also a time in Europe, certainly, science was not that established yet. There were other regions of the globe that were further ahead of the game. But if we look at Middle Ages, the forest, there were also a lot of superstitions going around, right? And I mean, you get all these tales and stories and legends, and usually the forest is a bad place where bad things happen, where witches live, where the monsters are, and beware of the forest. Is that also something that was sort of fueled by Christianity?
Yes, definitely. I would link this time, the Middle Ages, with the time when we started associating forest with something unpredictable, something unknown, something dangerous, something where people with the bad pasts or dangerous people could escape to. Like you have, all these tales about the Robin Hood and so on. He was the good one, but he lived with the bad ones in the forest, right? So definitely this is, I would say, also a part of the story when Christianity played an important role. We talk about Roman times, when the forest was a god and the tree was a god. So, the Christianity needed really reverse the story. So they kind of needed to discourage people from their relationship, their close connection to the forest. So by pushing them devils, all the bad creatures, as you said, witches, that was the way to scare people from the forest, to distance people from the forest. You don't want to go to the forest. There's something bad can happen there, right? Why you should go there? You should stay in the safe home, domestic space. I'm from northern Poland, from the very forest area, and I did actually research on marking forest space. People started putting crosses and some kind of small shrines for like Holy Mary or like other, or for Jesus or other saints, just to mark the dangerous space. So, they just started putting them in front of the forest, just to also kind of protect this forest, to kind of distinguish known space from unknown space. So Christianity, yes, was actually by putting dangerous creatures, devils, trying to distinguish people, distance people from the forest.
It sounds like also then there might have been a sort of a certain fear on behalf of the church of things that are natural. Also nature, but also natural urges, right? I mean, they wanted to keep a lid on everything pretty much, right? Anything that sort of came naturally was unpredictable, couldn't be controlled. I guess in a certain way, that is when, in the Middle Ages, the narrative started to change big time when it comes to nature, right?
Yes, definitely. Nature was, as I said, something what we should use, what we should organize for our needs, what we should use, but we should keep a distance. Because, as you said, this is something we actually cannot still fully control, because we don't have a technology, we don't know how to do it, so it's better to keep a distance from it.
Okay, if we just walk a little bit along here, Agata, these are the Stations of the Cross here on the monastic grounds. And just to get into our next chapter, because we're going to go to another defining period now, I want to tell you and our listeners a legend. I mentioned it earlier, this monastery is famous for a legend. And it's about a monk who was called Ivor, and he lived here in the monastery a long time ago, in medieval times, and he was having a crisis of faith as he walked through the gardens of the monastery. So let's just try and picture Ivor walking through these gardens here on this path. And suddenly he heard a very strange sound. And it was a very colourful bird that he'd never seen before, and intrigued, he followed the bird to a door in the monastery wall that Ivor, he'd never noticed this door before. And he passed through the door and settled down under a beech tree where the bird was singing in the branches, and immediately his doubts vanished and he felt happy again and he fell asleep. And he was woken by a distant ringing of the monastery bells, and he wanted to return through the door, but he couldn't find it anymore. And we're actually standing right in front of the door here now. Anyway, the story continues, because Ivo then went all the way round the monastery walls. It's quite a large grounds here, and he met some monks on the other side, none of whom he could recognise. They didn't know who he was, and when he told them his name, they blanched and told him that a monk going by the name of Ivor had disappeared over 300 years ago. And Ivor, hearing this, he saw God's hand at work, and having regained his faith, he lay down and died happily. That is the legend, Agata, and I would like to, invite you to, shall we risk it and step through this door and jump fast forward 300 years?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, let's go through. Okay, so now we're standing in the middle of the forest in the Siebengebirge, an old volcanic and rather hilly region, which was Germany's first nature reserve, something we can thank the Prussians for. So we're now in the 18th, 19th century. This was the period that saw the rise of modern forestry, which was invented by the Prussians. In fact, some say the Prussian takeover of the Rhineland following Napoleon's defeat in 1815 was instrumental in protecting the Siebengebirge from becoming a huge quarry, something which could have destroyed the entire forest here. You can still see several old quarries, and large parts of Cologne's famous cathedral, by the by, were actually built with stones from here. But the bottom line is that the Prussians liked this hilly forest region so much that they wanted to preserve it, which was a rather new concept, and at the same time they invented modern forestry. So, Agata, how did our relationship to trees and forest change under the Prussians? It sounds like quite another seismic shift there.
Yes, so before we talk about the religion and what was the role of Christianity in changing and shaping our relationship with the forest, and now we are in the 18th, 19th century, the beginning of the 18th century, and we see the forest which is organized differently. We see monocultures, we see forest plantations, and this we can connect with the idea of the state, of the Prussian state, and the way how they wanted to manage the landscape. So we are moving from the religion to the science. So now science became a new religion, one could say. So science is telling us that forest we should treat for trees. Trees are resources. Trees are perfect sources of wood. So we should organize and use our forest in a way that it will be the easiest for getting more resource, more wood. So we need straight lines, we need fast-growing trees, we need spruces, we need Scots pines, we need the trees that can be easily managed and organized. So Prussians, they start to organize the forest the same way they organize their society.
And the military.
Exactly. So you have a straight rows that could be easily counted, easily observed. Trees and forests now can be easily closed within the numbers. We can easily count it. We can easily put it on the maps. Forests become resource. Forests become something we can use. So we talk about sustainable forest management that was born during that time. So the idea was that, we will have enough of wood for now, but also for the future. Society needed more and more wood for fuel, from constructions, for building the cities. We have a rapid urbanization during that time. And now, the leaders, the rulers, they started to worry that we won't have enough of wood in the future. So we need to manage our forests this way that we will have enough of wood also in the future. So sustainable forest management aim in providing wood also for the future. So we wanted to not be afraid. We wanted to not live in the fear of not enough wood. So we started to organize our forest in different way. So this is how our forest monocultures in Central Europe were born.
Okay, but I mean, that also sounds like, I mean, we're standing here looking across now into the forest. There's a site there which, that's a spruce monoculture and they're all dead. I mean, that would also suggest then the Prussian ideal of preserving forests but also maximizing the harvest with monocultures. I mean, there are downsides to it, right? That model, it doesn't really work anymore, does it?
Well, it does not work here because, we have only spruces and it's not a natural environment for spruce monoculture. As you said, we have a climate change. It's getting drier and drier. It's not a natural environment for the species. So, this idea did not work anymore, and it's not working today. We can see it with our eyes now when we are standing here, that trees are dying because of the impact of climate change and changing conditions.
So if we're looking back at this period now and the Prussians, introducing modern forestry, making things very systematic, very orderly, but what would you say has changed with our perception to the forests? I mean, if we just grow trees to cut them down, I mean, what does that do to us as humans?
That's a difficult question. I think what we can see during last 20, 30 years, it's that...
There's some mountain bikers coming here right now. We'll just wait until they've passed. Okay, yeah. Germans like the forests, They walk in them, they hike in them, they bike in them. It's difficult to find a quiet spot here.
Yeah, that's true. But coming back to our monocultures, I think what we can see during the last years, 20, 30 years, depending where in Europe you are looking, we can see kind of shift in the attitudes. We value forest not only for the economic value. Of course, we did it also in the past, but now we can see it even more, one could say, that we started value forest also for other forest ecosystem services. We value forest because they provide habitats for animals, they are habitats for different species, but we also value forest because they provide us with the area for the recreation, as we just saw with the bikers. But also we come here because we want to calm down. We value forest for all this cultural, spiritual services forest can provide. So we are moving a little bit from looking at the forest only as a source of the wood, as Prussian could see it, to the forest as an ecosystem.
Wait a minute, does that mean we're going back to Germanic times? Or is this a different type of spirituality you're talking about?
I'm talking about a little bit different type of spirituality because we do not see forest as a god anymore. We can connect with the forest on the spiritual level, but it's not anymore the religious connection, I could say. So I would say that we are discovering forest on the new level. So we are maybe not coming back to Germanic times, but we are kind of rediscover forest, what it means for us as a nation, as a society, as individuals, and so on.
But would you say, I mean, to a certain degree, it sounds to me like we're starting to realise, the importance of the forest, of these ecosystems, not just for us, but for our planet, for our survival. Is this something that is also perhaps, changing our behaviour, our attitude towards forests, that we're starting to love them because we realise just how much we need them?
Yeah, I think somewhere really deep inside we know it. As a human beings, we don't want to live far away from the forest. Even in the pandemic time, COVID pandemic showed us that people are really so connected to the forest. We had this spike in the forest visitors all around Europe, all around the globe. People just wanted to go to the forest because it's a place where they find a peace, right? So maybe there is something biological in us which brings us back to the forest. So I think especially scientists, they know the value of the forest. They're trying to remind us and policymakers how important forests are for our futures to be able to stay in this planet. But I think what is really important and also very beautiful is that individuals are discovering what forests mean for them, like how close to the forest they want to be and they want to live and they want to protect them.
Just on a purely individual level, Agata, I mean, how's it for you? What does the forest mean to you personally?
For me, forest home. I grew up in the forest, not even in the village. I always make a joke about it that I'm not a city person, but I'm also not a village person. I grew up in the forest. My dad is a forester, and I spent my entire childhood in the forest. So when I think about home, I think about forest. And I deeply believe that forest shaped me, who I am today, and that's why I'm forest anthropologist, because I grew up in the forest. And without this experience, this direct experience of being in the forest, waking up and hearing the Scots pine tree in front of my window, I do not think I would be today here talking to you about forests. Of course, I have my own preferences, what kind of forest I like, where I feel the most comfortable in the forest, with whom I like to go to the forest. But I think this is something which is a still open card for all of us. It's evolving relationship. As long as you go to the forest, discover new places, you are just become yourself while becoming with the forest.
I mean, it's clear that our forests are changing all the time, right? I think we've established that in this episode, that since Roman times the forests have changed a lot. Our attitudes towards the forest have changed, the way we view the forest, the way we use it, what we do in the forest. I mean, if we're looking at the forests here now in Europe, particularly in Germany, I mean, the vast majority of the forests here are monocultures. I mean, looking ahead, this is not going to be the future, is it? These forests are going to change again. I mean, what's in store for us, and what does this mean for us as humans, with our relationship with the forest, looking ahead?
I think it's a very challenging picture in our head when we think about the future. While standing here, we see, and it's obvious for us that this cannot be the forest of the future. We have an outbreak of bark beetle, we have droughts, monocultures are not doing very well. So I think we really need to listen to the forest while also listening to the scientist, and be ready for changes. We cannot sustain the planet as it's now. We are facing a climate change, and we need to be ready for also changing our relationship with the forest. The forest of the future need to be ready for what is coming, and I think that's why it will be difficult to sustain the monocultures we have now. We need to listen to the ecosystems. We need to discover the potential of ecosystems for the future and how we can shape them to build resilient forest for resilient society.
But do you see us shifting back also to making the forest, or turning it more into a sacred place again? That forests, that we have to protect them and let forests be, not see them as timber production sites, but that we need more natural reserves that we don't, impinge on as humans?
I think, the beauty of the forest is that it provides opportunity for open interpretations. It's up to the future societies, and it's up to us today to decide what forests mean to us. I think forest, it's beautiful ecosystem that can provide a lot of ecosystem services in many places. And I would not say that we need this strict segregation for just, wood production or just protection. There's a lot of possibilities to protect our forest while still using it. So I think we just need to be open to many interpretations, what we can do with the forest. We need to protect them because there won't be future without forests. That's for sure.
Agata, thank you very much for your time today and, joining me on this historic trip. We've covered quite a bit of ground. I really do appreciate your time and your expertise.
Thank you so much. It was a lot of fun for me.
That's it. Time to wrap things up. I hope you enjoyed this episode of On the Green Fence. I certainly had a great time in the forest with Agata and learned a lot of things. And and maybe, if you're fortunate enough to be living close to a forest, why not go for a stroll right now after listening to this? And when you get back from that walk, why not send us an email and let us know what the forest means to you personally? It'd be really interesting to hear that. You can send an email to onthegreenfence@dw.com. This episode was produced with the help of Natalie Muller and Tim Schauenberg. My sound engineer was Gerd Georgi. Yeah, that's it. Many thanks for listening and sharing On the Green Fence. My name is Neil King. Take it easy and take care.